Welcome to News Out from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm James Menendez. The leader of Ethiopia's Tigray region says his TPLF forces will fight on after the government says it's taken control of the province's main city.
It appears that the TPLF withdrew without a fight, and what comes next will be very interesting. The TPLF are predicting there'll be a substantial insurgency.
Also, a car bomb driven into an Afghan military base has killed at least 30 people. The man behind Darth Vader's mask, Dave Prowse, has died. We'll look at his roles as movie villain and road safety instructor. And
don't be too hard on yourself. It's okay to not be okay. From pop stars to the Queen and stars of the silver screen, everyone on earth can have a difficult day.
The two London Underground workers whose messages of support at stations have become a global phenomenon during the pandemic. All of that and more after the news.
BBC News, hello, I'm Gareth Barlow. At least 30 members of the Afghan security forces have been killed in a car bombing at a military base in Ghazni in the east of the country. It's one of the worst attacks in a recent surge in violence. Jill McGivering reports.
A vehicle laden with explosives hit the military base on the outskirts of Ghazni city. Meanwhile, in Zabul, several people died in a bomb attack on a vehicle carrying the head of the provincial council. He survived. All this comes as negotiators in Doha continue their struggle to make progress with stalled peace talks. The Taliban say both sides have now agreed a framework for talks, but the government side seems divided, with suggestions that President Ashraf Ghani objects to some of the terms.
The leader of the rebellion in Tigray region against Ethiopia's central government, Debretsion Gebremichael, has said his TPLF forces will fight on, despite reports that federal troops have taken control of the Tigrayan capital. In a message to the Reuters news agency, the TPLF leader said his forces were withdrawing from the city of Mekelle. The Ethiopian government says its troops now control Mekelle, although there's no independent confirmation. Our correspondent, Kaukeran Yibatal, is in Addis Ababa.
We're understanding that the Federal Army has controlled all the major cities in the Tigray state, and now if they are saying that they have controlled the state capital, it means that the TPLF might be choosing to retreat back to the mountainous areas in that state and try to take some sort of guerrilla warfare in the coming days, weeks, or even more.
A London-based human rights group on Eritrea says thousands of Eritrean refugees who've lived for many years in the neighbouring Tigray region of Ethiopia have been abducted by Eritrean troops who crossed the border. The group says the soldiers, taking advantage of the fighting in Tigray, seized Eritreans living in a border town, as well as 2 UN-sponsored refugee camps. On Saturday, the head of the UN Refugee Agency said he had lost contact with the camps. The Australian city of Sydney has recorded its hottest ever November night as firefighters battle wildfires. Michael Bristow has this report.
At its lowest, the temperature in Sydney was just over 25 degrees Celsius. The demand for electricity soared as residents turned on their air conditioners to cool down. Many of them had spent the day at the beach in temperatures of more than 40 degrees. The hot weather led to the first significant outbreak of fires of the summer in New South Wales, although the temperature in Sydney began to fall on Sunday, and meteorologists have predicted that in general, conditions this summer will be cooler and wetter in Australia.
The security forces in Belarus have confronted opposition supporters who've turned out for the 16th Sunday in a row to protest about President Lukashenko's disputed re-election in August. Social media footage showed police near Minsk firing a shot into the air to warn chanting protesters. World News from the BBC. The incoming Prime Minister of Montenegro, Zdravko Krivokapic, has promised to restore relations with Serbia after the tit-for-tat expulsions of ambassadors. Writing on Twitter, Mr. Krivokapic accused the outgoing administration of deepening divisions and polarising society. He said he would work on the principle of good neighbourliness and mutual respect. A ship management company is in talks to release 3 Greek sailors kidnapped earlier this month by pirates off the Nigerian coast. The Greek authorities said the crew members were taken from a loading vessel after the attackers boarded it 2 weeks ago. 2 sailors left on board were able to steer the vessel back to the port of Lagos. More than 100 people have been snatched in the Gulf of Guinea this year. Initial projections from a referendum in Switzerland suggest almost exactly half of voters have supported plans to make Swiss companies legally liable for environmental or human rights violations they cause anywhere in the world. Switzerland is home to many huge companies, with about a third of global commodities traded there. And US officials say a mysterious metal structure found recently at a remote desert site in the state of Utah has disappeared. The shiny pillar was seen by local officials counting bighorn sheep from the air. Ken Slimani has this report.
When the obelisk was found in a remote part of the Utah desert earlier this month, the officials who spotted it from the air were baffled. There was wild speculation that it was the work of aliens, with many noting the similarity to strange alien monoliths that trigger huge leaps in human progress in Stanley Kubrick's film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, the 3.5-meter monolith has gone again, just as mysteriously as it appeared. In a statement, Utah officials said they could only speculate the aliens had taken it back.
BBC News.
Hello and welcome to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. We're coming to you live from London. I'm James Menendez, and we're going to start today in Ethiopia in the conflict between the federal government and dissident forces in the northern Tigray region. After 3 weeks of fighting, the government says it's now taken control of the main city in the province, Mekelle, although there's no independent confirmation of that. But the leader of the TPLF, the Tigrayan authorities, Debretsion Gebremichael, admitted his militia was withdrawing from Mekelle, but vowed to fight on. Hundreds of people have been killed during this conflict. Tens of thousands have had to flee their homes. We're going to be talking to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in a few minutes' time, and also to the Ethiopian government. But first, let's get some analysis of what has happened with Muriti Mutiga, Project Director for the Horn of Africa for the International Crisis Group, the Conflict Prevention Organisation. First of all, is it really the case that government forces now control Mekelle?
There has been a communications blackout, as you'll know, in Tigray for quite a while, but it does appear indeed correct that the Ethiopian Federal Forces have taken control of the main city in Tigray, Mekelle, but whether that means this is at an end is, of course, open to question. It appears that the TPLF withdrew without a fight, and what comes next will be very interesting. The TPLF are predicting there'll be a substantial insurgency, but the federal authorities assert that this operation is over.
And what do you make of that statement by the TPLF? I mean, will they turn this into a long insurrection, a long guerrilla war?
The circumstances in the 1980s suggest that the TPLF have substantial capacity to launch a major insurgency. The Tigrayan people are quite unhappy with what they see as a blanket operation that has profiled and harassed the Tigrayan people. The terrain is quite hospitable. It's a very mountainous area where the TPLF leadership and its forces have withdrawn to. However, the circumstances have changed. The TPLF, of course, retains significant material. They retain significant know-how within their ranks, but it's not clear that the Tigrayan people will be willing to make the same sacrifices they did in the 1980s to support a major insurgency. So I think the key thing now is that a political solution is absolutely necessary. If they are to prevent a major insurgency, it's essential that they try and reach out to the ordinary Tigrayans, make sure that they feel that they have a place in modern Ethiopia.
In other words, do they need to persuade people in Tigray that they're better off with the central government, or at least not worse off than with the TPLF?
Without question, I think they have not done a great job of that. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen Tigrayans being prevented from leaving the country. We've seen the arrests and indiscriminate profiling of Tigrayans, including in the capital. And so there has to be a shift in the approach of the central government. This seems to have been a success for the Prime Minister. Of course, it's possible that you will have a substantial TPLF counterattack. But if they are to persuade the Tigrayan people that they belong in modern Ethiopia, they have really to embrace them and to show that they are not a conquering force, they're not an occupying force, but one that seeks to reintegrate the region into the broader Ethiopia.
And just one final thought. What might it mean for people in other parts of Ethiopia who may be thinking that they need to start flexing their muscles? Will the experience of the Tigrayans make them think, well, actually, that not such a great idea, perhaps?
The tragedy of what's happened over the last couple of weeks is that this is at root a political dispute. It has been fought at great cost to Ethiopian lives, hundreds, possibly thousands dead, tens of thousands uprooted from their homes. But what needs to be resolved is the question of what's the right balance of power between the capital, Addis Ababa, and the states which feel that they would like to have autonomy.
That was Murithi Mutiga of the International Crisis Group speaking to me from Nairobi. Well, Bilene Seyum is the press secretary for the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and joins us now from the capital, Addis Ababa. Welcome to NewsHour. First of all, can you just confirm whether Mekele, the capital of Tigray State, is now under control of the Ethiopian army?
Thank you for having me. Indeed, I do confirm that the National Defense Forces have taken over the city of Mekele yesterday. Critical public institutions, including the airport, the regional government, hospitals, are all under federal authority and the National Defense Forces.
How much resistance was there? Hello, can you still hear me? Bilene Seyum, can you hear me? I can hear something in the distance there. Are you still on the line? You can hear me now. I was just asking.
I'm still on the line, yes.
Yeah, how much resistance did your forces face?
I don't have any information on resistance, but one thing that is very clear in the information that has come in is that the residents in the city of Mekele were very cooperative with the National Defense Forces. As you know, over the past weeks, there has been great caution and care from the National Defense Forces to avoid cities and towns in order to ensure that there's no civilian casualties. So what I have information with regards to Mekele being under the federal command is that there was no any targeted any targets towards civilians that would end in casualties as well.
Right, but were there any casualties during the fighting?
I don't have any information on that at the moment.
There have been some reports today that a hospital in the city was bombed by federal forces. Did that happen?
Federal forces would not do that. We have intelligence over the past few weeks, and we have been sharing that actually, that the TPLF would be in preparations to do something as horrific as what had occurred in Maikadra and pin it on the federal government. We have also evidence that is surfacing in other cities that have come under the command of the federal government, where TPLF forces were also hiding weapons in public areas, including churches and worship areas as well. So if anything, I don't have any information to that effect, and with certainty the National Defense Forces would not be targeting public utilization or infrastructure that is in service to the public.
How worried are you about the prospect of a long insurrection by TPLF forces?
TPLF, unlike the way that it's been touted over the past few weeks for being battle-hardened, is really not. The old guard are still under the illusion of their guerrilla warfare that they had engaged in back in the 80s. However, a majority of the Tigray people are really exhausted from that. And what we witnessed over the past 3 years specifically is while the TPLF old guards were much more rooted and focused on the political instabilities that they were behind to destabilize Ethiopia, there hasn't been a lot of focus for residents within the region. So the economy is not doing that great. There hasn't been a lot of focus on essential services as well. So the people of Tigray are really exhausted, and there isn't that momentum from within the region that would support the TPLF for these kind of long drawn out altercations.
Right. Well, it's difficult for us to ask people there because, of course, many journalists, can't get access and we can't communicate with them. But I suppose the question is, how are you going to persuade people in Tigray to support the central government?
This is not a matter of persuasion per se. There's been a lot of public consultations that have been had with Ethiopians of Tigray origin who are in the capital city as well. But now going into the Tigray region, the provisional administration, which has been set up constitutionally by the House of Federation, is already active. They're already on the ground, and one of their primary tasks over the 6 months of the duration of the state of emergency is to set up, the institutions that have been betrayed by the TPLF, because some of their critical services were betrayed by the leadership that had been put in there. That ran off, leaving the services unattended for their own population as well. So setting up humanitarian provisions, setting up services that are key in the area, and a key aspect of that is also engaging in dialogue with the people of Tigray. Now, one thing to really understand about the provisional administration of Tigray that has been set up is that it's not a foreign body, but it's constituted or comprises political parties from the Tigray region and people of Tigray who are now working in favor of addressing the needs of the Tigray people.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Bilena Sayum, Press Secretary for the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. Well, the fighting in northern Ethiopia has forced tens of thousands of people to flee, mostly to neighbouring Sudan. Filippo Grandi is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and he's there and joins us on the line now. Welcome to NewsHour. You've been to see some of the refugee camps. Just explain to us what the situation is at the moment.
Yes, thank you. People continue to come. Yesterday we had about 800 crossing the Sudanese border. The day before, when I was there, 550. So it's not the same figures as we saw a couple of weeks ago, but still substantive numbers of people crossing. Sudan has kept borders open. I think this needs to be noted and commended in these difficult times, in spite of all its challenges. But Sudan needs help, of course, in the response. It doesn't have the resources. Yesterday, the UN put out an appeal for $150 million for 6 months. And it is important to respond, that donors respond quickly, because we do need to step up the response, both at the border and in the location that has been identified by the Sudanese government to move people to, in order to be away from the more dangerous areas.
Yeah, I'm afraid time's a little bit limited, but I do need to ask you about this. These reports that thousands of Eritrean refugees who'd lived in Tigray, that they'd been abducted by Eritrean troops. Do you know what's happened to them?
No, unfortunately, we have no access anymore to those camps in Tigray, but it is a great concern, the treatment of those 100,000 Eritrean refugees. Ethiopia has always hosted them with great generosity, so I keep appealing to the federal government of Ethiopia for this hospitality to continue. This is their responsibility, and they need to continue to uphold it. I am very worried about that.
But if it is true, and it's Eritrean troops that have crossed over the border, is there anything you can do?
There is nothing I can do, especially given that we don't have access to the area. But all I can say at this point, it would be a major violation of international norms if this had happened. But I don't have any confirmation that this has happened other than the reports that you have seen.
We're out of time, I'm afraid, but thank you very much for coming on. Filippo Grandi there, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, speaking to us from Sudan. You're listening to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. Still to come on the programme. We'll be paying tribute to Dave Prowse, the British actor who found fame as the man behind the mask of Darth Vader in the original Star Wars films. He's died at the age of 85. That's coming up in about half an hour. Let's just recap our main headlines from the newsroom at the moment. A bomb blast has killed at least 30 Afghan security personnel. We'll be talking about that and getting more details in about 15 minutes' time. And as we've been hearing, the leader of the Tigray region of Ethiopia has said his forces will fight on, but has acknowledged that they're withdrawing from the main city, Mekelle. And one other headline, Sydney's recorded its highest overnight temperature ever for November as wildfires return to Australia. This is James Menendez with News Hour live from the BBC. Two workers on the London Underground have become a social media phenomenon, followed by the likes of Michelle Obama, the rock band U2, and the pop singer Katy Perry, among many others. It's all because of the poems that they write on the station whiteboards, used normally for information about delays. In the last few months, people on their way to work on the tube have been reading their messages about mental health, physical illnesses, and, of course, the coronavirus pandemic. They've become known as the Masked Duo and were anonymous, using the nicknames N1, No One, and E1, Everyone. But they've now been unmasked because they've published their poetry in a book called All on the Board. Here are two examples. This is the first by N1, Ian Redpath.
Don't be too hard on yourself. It's okay to not be okay. From pop stars to the Queen and stars of the silver screen, everyone on earth can have a difficult day.
Here's another one. This is Jeremy Chopra, who's E1.
I miss the Friday feeling. I even miss the Monday morning blues. I miss the escapism of cinema, sports and travelling. I miss not feeling anxious while obsessively checking the news. I miss hugging, high fives and shaking hands. I miss being with my family and friends. Never again will I take anyone or anything for granted. I will embrace the human race when this ends.
Well, we brought the Underground poets together to talk a bit more about the personal experiences behind their writing. And Ian explained first why he began putting his thoughts on the board.
We didn't expect anything like this at all, especially like when we started writing about our own experiences, like mental health, and it did resonate with people. You know, we get loads of people saying, you know, how did you get this so spot on? And it's just because we've been there and we're experiencing it and we're going through the same thing. And then it just led us to sort of want all invisible illnesses to be seen in some kind of way. And like, you know, at some point we will get round to writing about every single condition, just to make people feel less alone. In January 2008, I was driving a Victoria Line train and a young girl jumped out in front of my train at Pimlico Station. For ages after, it's like, I was afraid of the dark and like I'd have nightmares. And this is why I'm just so passionate about just like the anti-suicide message, and you know there will be a better day and there will be a brighter day, and for people to talk to people if they're feeling like that.
Men holding things in is particularly damaging, and with eating disorders it's one of the hardest things, I think, for men with an eating disorder to come out and say, you know, what they've been going through. I still struggle to talk about it, and writing, mentioning it in the book at all is really, really, really tough. But I know that my kind of experience of it kind of damaged me in many different ways, and I feel like a lot of other kind of physical ailments and mental ones have come because of my eating disorder. I mean, I'm okay now. I got through it, but not many people do, and I don't think we talk about it enough either. And I'm hoping that one day I'll be able to talk more about it and, you know, kind of go into the full details and really explain how I got through it.
Obviously, we've been writing messages for, 3.5 years, but this year it just felt even more important to do so. It's like, you know, in a time when, you know, people are being kind of forced apart, you know, for their own safety, we kind of wanted to bring everyone back together, or trying to bring people back together. Like, obviously, we're considered key workers too, and we was leaving messages for like the NHS staff and the shop workers and everyone during the pandemic that had to be at work. We was giving them messages of support on the train stations. You know, all our mental health is going to go up and down, and it's all right. You know, it's okay to be, you know, not okay. You know, it's so we kind of wanted to be there more so for people than ever before this year, particularly this year. We're going through all these different things that we miss, and at the end of the day, like, I've realised the thing that I miss the most is hugging people. You know, I just can't wait to get back to like hugging and handshaking. If we've got to sacrifice a few things to get through it, then and there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's looking forward to getting there.
The underground poets, Ian Redpath and Jeremy Chopra there. Now, a happy ending to a sad tale. An elephant long kept in poor conditions at a zoo in Pakistan has been moved to retirement in Cambodia after a campaign by animal welfare activists and the pop star Cher. The American singer's paid for the elephant called Karvan to be airlifted and taken to a wildlife sanctuary. The animals live for decades in a small, barren enclosure in Islamabad, sometimes chained. Our Pakistan correspondent Secunda Kamani watched the big move unfold.
I'm at Islamabad Zoo, where the process of shifting Karvan the elephant is underway. He's already been sedated and is inside a crate waiting to be hoisted by a large crane onto a waiting trawler truck that's then going to take him to Islamabad airport later tonight and on to a new life in Cambodia. His most vocal supporter, the pop sensation Cher, is not here today, to the disappointment of many. She has been in Islamabad. She has really spearheaded a campaign for the last few years calling for Karvan's release, and she's now on her way to Cambodia, where she will meet him at the wildlife sanctuary he's going to be taken to. This follows a Pakistani court ruling closing this zoo down because of its poor conditions. Karvan was given as a gift by the Sri Lankan government to Pakistan back in 1985. He's lived in a sparse enclosure here ever since, but he hasn't been fed properly. At times he's been chained up, forced to perform for visitors. Even now he spends a lot of his time swaying his head from left to right. It's a common sign of distress amongst elephants, we're told. And the situation got even worse 8 years ago when his only mate died, and that led to this nickname for him, the world's loneliest elephant, and this huge social media campaign that Cher was part of sprang up. Now, a specialist international charity has been preparing him for this journey, getting him used to the crate that he's going to be travelling in, encouraging him to follow their commands by offering him rewards of food. And I was speaking to Ingo Schmeidinger, who's the elephant expert at the charity Four Paws.
It's like any other dog training or training your cat or whatever.
It's a bit bigger than a cat.
It's a little big, just it depends on the cat. I think the main deal is that he feels comfortable with whatever you do, or at least excited enough to follow and maybe to follow you somehow. Now, because as soon as he is kind of afraid, as soon as he shows mistrust, then you can go back home.
Karvan's a 5-ton animal. In fact, he's been having to lose weight recently because his diet was quite poor. He was eating too much sugarcane, so he was too heavy, obese, some of the vets said. But he's lost 100 kilograms or so. This charity, Four Paws, do have a lot of experience moving animals in difficult scenarios. Dr. Amir Khalil, who's one of their leading figures, he's evacuated animals from zoos in eastern Aleppo, from Mosul, when IS were there. So this situation in many ways is much less dangerous than that, of course. But having said that, they've never moved an animal as big as Karvan.
They asked me if we can put earplugs if the noise in the plane, if oxygen is missing in the airplane or air pressure fall down, if a 5-ton elephant, including the container, will come to 11 ton, if you move one leg in front or back, I think the pilot will not be able. So it's really a precise mission. And now the end is near.
Dr. Khalil has his own way of keeping Karvan calm and singing to him, and his favourite song, according to Dr. Khalil, actually, is not one of Cher's, but Frank Sinatra's I Did It My Way. But having said that, Cher was herself here visiting Karvan yesterday for the first time, and she was also singing to him, so he may have a new favourite by the end of the weekend.
Much more than this, I did it my way.
My Way, Karvan the elephant's favourite song. Ending that report by the BBC's Secunda Kamani in Pakistan. You're listening to News Hour from the BBC World Service. Do stay with us. We've got plenty more to come in the second half of the programme. Don't go away.